All right, so for this lesson, we are going to draw a landscape. And then we're going to go back and revise it some. But first, I want you to work on drawing a landscape on a sheet of paper. It can be in your sketchbook or a piece of paper that's loose. Draw a landscape that has 2 trees, a house, 3 birds, flowers, 3 hills or mountains, clouds, the sun, a person, grass, and a pond. And then on this, I want you to try your best. Okay, you can pause now or wait for the next step, but I want you to draw it first before we get on to the next part. So pause. All right, are you ready? So you should have drawn a landscape. Now we're going to go through some things that are common mistakes that people do in their landscapes, and I'm only making you draw the one beforehand because there's a good chance you wouldn't fess up to doing them if you were doing these little things that I call the no-nos of art. Okay, so the first thing is a stick man. And all I hear is, I can't draw anything but a stick man. Here's how. Okay, so instead of drawing a stick man, I want you to draw a shape man. So we're going to start and draw his torso. It's kind of a rectangle. I taper it in at the top a little bit. And then I'm going to draw him some sleeves. My marker's going out here, so just bear with me. I'm going to draw him some sleeves. They're kind of a triangle on the side there. Then I'm going to draw him some shorts. Okay, rectangle, rectangle. I just don't bring the one up in the middle to leave the top. Then legs, it's another little rectangle, oval for a shoe, oval for a shoe. Going down for arms, rectangle. And then I do mitten hands where it's an oval and then a thumb for now. And then I'm going to come up on his neck, and I like to close that in. You'll have a rectangle for the neck as well, and then a head, and then hopefully, if you can draw a stick man, you can draw a little bit of texture for hair. And then the smiley face. Okay, so this to this, easy for you to change. So now instead of stick man, we are drawing shape man. No more excuses. No more can I only draw a stick man. Done. All right, moving on to your mountains or your hills. Now, not that this isn't a way that a lot of illustrators or cartoonists will draw hills, but instead of doing half moon hills that are super perfect and just this, it almost looks like a scale if you continue this pattern on, where you're doing perfect upside down rainbow shapes here. Or instead of doing this triangle peaks where all of the mountains, even if you draw some smaller, are perfectly an equilateral triangle to where all sides are even with little snow caps. So instead of this, so we're going to avoid this one and this one, I want you to, on your paper, try to think of being sporadic. Think of what the actual texture of the land would look like if you went somewhere where it was hilly or mountainous. So that line that's the top of the hills and mountains is not going to be perfect all the way across. It is not going to have just one peak or two. It's going to have many, many little peaks. So I did trick you in saying that I wanted you to draw 3 hills or mountains because I knew you would go for one of these. But instead of that, we're going to go for something that is a little more irregular. Okay, irregular is going to be our key as we go through the no-nos of art, because you don't want your artwork to be cookie cutter, or anybody can do the exact same thing as you. So we're going to avoid doing half moon hills and triangle perfect peaks. All right, so that takes care of our person off the list, and it takes care of our 3 hills or mountains. Now let's move on. Let's look at those trees. I'm guessing that a lot of you guys did this little bad boy where you did boom, 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 and then a circle. Or maybe you got a little spicier and you did a trunk, maybe with a limb, and then a cotton ball on top. So I call these lollipop trees here because they look like a stick with a circle on top, or cloud trees. So here's where I want you to go with your trees. The same thing as the mountains, I want you to think what a tree really looks like. There are a few species of trees to where their branches will fork out at the same height, but more commonly, trees will have branches going out at different rates. Also, on your paper, you don't have to worry about trying to squeeze everything into it. Like maybe this corner here is your paper, and if some of it goes off of the edge, that's okay. It does not have to all fit onto the composition. It actually promotes a little bit more interest if you have some of it that purposefully goes off of the edge of the paper. I had to be careful while I was talking because I start marking on my desk a lot. All right, so here's just a tree. Now, there's some other ways you can finish it out. I know that a lot of people really like to add apples to these or owl holes. You can do the same thing on this. Just remember, it's not going to be perfect. So if you want to go back in and put something like a burl, that's what they call this a lot of times, where there's a knot on the tree or where a hole appears in the tree, you can go back and do that. You can also go back and add some texture. Now I'm using a Sharpie, so there's not a whole lot of shading here. You can go back and add some texture if you wish, and then just make the tree your own. Now I'm going to go into suns. I have two different things to talk about for suns. The first one is going to be heartbreaking. As soon as you get your paper, almost every person drawing a landscape starts here. Boom, corner, suns. Please, please free the sun from the corner. There's no reason that he has to be shoved into the corner, boxed in over here, like Baby from Dirty Dancing, where she's put in the corner. Let's keep him out somewhere else in the paper. Or maybe he's so high up in the sky he doesn't even appear in your landscape. But I did ask you to draw one. So let's see, we talked about the sun, we talked about the trees. All right. So I did ask you to draw one, so I want you to think about how you could incorporate it somewhere else on the paper. And then while you're thinking of that, I also want you to avoid making this mistake. Okay? This is super cute and it's great for illustrations, but in reality, we don't really see these rays, especially as a black heavy line that just shoot out from the sun. Now you might see a beam of light coming through a cloud, but it doesn't look like this. So we're going to avoid countable sun rays also. And I'll talk more about how to draw the sun later on. It's a little harder to do with a Sharpie. Let me wait till I get my pencil back. Okay, next thing, a basic house. So this is straight from your kindergarten journals where you come in and you draw the box, a triangle. Now you might get fancy. You might give us a cloud of smoke coming out of a chimney. You might have a door and then a window with 4 panes. This, we are well beyond now. We are in high school and can do so much better than a basic house. Okay, so I want you to think about a 3-dimensional house. So think in 3D and what that would look like. The easiest thing to think of is like a pole barn. So if you think of a pole barn, it is a long rectangle on the side. And then it has that house shape, but not the same way that we're thinking of it. You would have this rectangle that comes up to the side. Here's the tricky part when you're doing 3D. These lines on the side of a house or a box are going to stay the same straight up and down. So's this one back here. It will be up and down. It will not be slanted or slanted this way. It's the exact same perpendicular, parallel to these other two. Okay, perpendicular to the ground. All right, then it's going to have a triangle shape on this side. Now this line is going to run parallel to this line. And if you don't get this perfect the first time, that's fine. This is still a big step up from this basic house. Okay, then you might have, we're going to turn this pole barn into some sort of building. You might have that there's a concrete pad, there's some doors here, and here's the other thing. This little window is just like this. This window does not exist frequently in real life. A lot of times you'll have windows that have no panes. You'll have windows that have 4 and 4, so 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom, and then the center is the part that will allow it to slide up and down. Or I see this a lot. This is most of the houses I drive by every day, where they have 6 on top and 6 on bottom, making it a 12 pane window. But just 4 panels of glass, this is not nearly as common in today's construction of homes. I still see a lot of people drawing these, but we're not seeing those in real life. So when you start adding windows to whatever structure you do, think of that. So you're going to have 12 pane windows, 2 of those side by side. This is how my house windows kind of are. And then there's a shutter, and then a shutter. Or are you going to have just the simple, this is how my brother's house is. His house just has one on top and one on bottom with shutters. And there's no little dividers in the window. You have to decide. But branch out and go beyond this because we just don't see that 4 pane window as much as you would think. All right, moving on to the next thing. Your flowers. This flower is beautiful. It is used a lot in graphic design to kind of symbolize that flower power 1970s big daisy. But if you look at a daisy, very rarely does its flower stand perfectly where you can see every petal like this. Now, a sunflower, perhaps, but more than likely you're going to get different views of that flower. So maybe it's kind of leaning over and you're seeing the back of it, and it's going to have way more than 6 petals. Maybe it's still facing you and you can draw the center in. Maybe it's you're seeing it and it's facing upward towards the sun, which is most common for flowers because they're seeking the sun from above. Notice the sun's still not in the corner. I can't hardly put that sun in that corner. But it's seeking the sun. So think about that. Think of which direction your flowers are facing, and also think of how many petals you're putting on them, because more than likely it's going to be harder to count than 6. Okay, next up is grass. Now, going back to that basic elementary school picture that you drew, I know so many of you drew this little tree, drew this little house with the 4 pane window. And then when you got done, to make it look real, you would go back and add your grass. And you can count exactly how many blades of grass you had in your yard when you were in kindergarten. Not a thing. So going back to that idea of irregular makes it look more realistic. So try to draw grass in tufts. If you're doing an illustration style to where it's you have to use a pen or a marker, it's supposed to be cartoony. Think of it as small groupings of this little tuft shape, kind of like how when we did the mountain across, we were trying to not make the exact same shape or repeat the exact same thing. Now, if you're using a pencil and have the ability to kind of shade it in, you might be able to get more realistic. Like, let's start with just a little shaded area here. And then you're going to go in and start pulling up blades of grass because it's really important that this looks like wispy, thin, shaded grass area. If you do this really, really fast, there's no way you can go back in and count these. But it's going to look very realistic because you have done so many that it starts to create a little field of grass. Let me press harder so you can see it a little better. Yeah, so you can see how that's starting to look more like grass. And we definitely can't sit there and count it like we could at the beginning. Now, the next thing, this one's tricky. Cotton ball clouds. Now, there are times when you look outside that the clouds just look so perfect. They look just like the opening scene of The Simpsons, where those clouds float in and they're all exactly the same. They have no flaws. But again, that's not reflected in reality very often. So, to keep with the same idea of being more irregular, you can go in and start taking that same idea and stretching it out. So this is like step 1 of getting your clouds to a different place. Okay, so you start doing this shape, but you've stretched it out wider. Then you might find yourself, instead of using your pencil to actually outline them, you take your eraser on a sky that is shaded in and you erase that shape in. Okay, so you're erasing in. And then maybe you go back in and kind of add some edging where you can see the definition of the cloud. Okay, but this and this are still a big step up from a whole sky full of the same exact cotton ball cloud. All right, we're getting close. We have now went through. Let me mark all these off. We've done the trees, we've done the house, we've done flowers and hills, clouds. We have done the person and the sun and the grass. So we still have to do birds and pond. So the pond is a little tricky. The main thing that you want to avoid is making it look like the perfect above ground pool. You just don't want it to look perfect. You do want to get it to a realistic point, but not to the point where it looks just like a pool. All right, so if you were drawing in a field, let me get this dark enough where you can see it, and you were drawing a landscape, and you had mountains going on up here, okay, and then you were going to draw a big, pretty pond right here. You're going to really stretch that out. You're thinking of the perspective of a person standing on the ground looking at something from a flat surface. So think of like I'm standing here and looking over here. Not so much that I'm from above looking down, but from the side view. This helps me remember that it kind of needs to be more of a stretched out view of a pond. Whereas this big circle pool shape is something you would see more from an airplane. All right, so that's the main thing. With the pool or with the pond, you're going to draw it really stretched out sideways to show a different perspective. Now, my favorite thing is the McDonald's bird, so I saved that one for last because it never ever fails that when somebody starts finishing an artwork, whether they are really advanced or whether they are just beginning, when they do birds, they come up with these 3 M's. They're flying in a V pattern always, and they perfectly create the McDonald's arches, just like those 2 golden arches that you see when you really start craving French fries. You have drawn a McDonald's emblem and not a bird. Now this is really easy to switch over, so we don't want to do the McDonald's birds anymore. I do an oval body. I give it a little tail at the back, and then you can do the beak and head if you want to. And then I do the wing, and then point it down, and then the wing, and then point it down. Now you can do this way too, to where it looks like they're flapping up. But just this little switch ups your game again from the McDonald's bird. So all of these things are really simple ideas that we kind of just commonly just do it without even thinking about it. But we want to try to avoid this list. Now I will go back and show you after we are all done marking off this list. We're going to go back and redraw a landscape, trying to not use any of these no-nos of art. And then I will show you what I have come up with. So this kind of incorporates the same list of things I gave you at the beginning. Instead of having lollipop trees, I tried to break it up. I did give it a little bit of value and texture by kind of smudging in some pencil, shading a little bit. And then my leaves go off the paper up here. I'm not worried about trying to fit them all into the space. Now my mountains in the background, you can see they are definitely not cookie cutter. They're very irregular. This one's much taller than these two. My clouds, not a cotton ball by any means. They're elongated, and then I even have it to where it comes out over where I put my sun. That sun is free from the corner. It's peeking out behind this cloud here, and I leave it solid white. I even went ahead and showed you that like you can take your eraser back in if you really want to make those sun rays and do it to where you're pulling the color off of the page and making it look like a light beam. I have my birds here. They're much more detailed looking than my plain old McDonald's birds. I have a house that I started off with that pole barn house shape. So again, you have the rectangle, triangle, and then you have the side rectangles. My stick person became shape person. So you can see here's the rectangle, 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 and you just build him up. Oval, and again, I like to use the mittens a lot for when I can't figure out hands, like if you're just starting out. My grass, definitely can't count the grass. I have several little areas around my elongated pond. Does not look like a pool at all. Okay, then down here I have flowers. They may be a little harder to see because they're so light, but they're kind of reaching out and facing different directions looking for sun. And I have a couple more trees over here, and I think I've included all of the things in a more realistic manner and in a way that definitely doesn't take me back to my elementary school days of drawing. Hopefully, this little lesson helps you. You are expected to turn in a landscape that is corrected. And then I want you to, in the comments, make sure you tell me which one of these that you were definitely doing. Like, I'll tell you guys, when I first did this lesson, the one that I was definitely doing was those birds. I always thought that I had just the most beautiful birds. And then I didn't realize that I was just taking the easiest way out and making these birds. So tell me which one you think you struggled with the most. All right, good luck, guys.